The first topic of this great battle that we're about to see is who's the next face of the NBA? Anthony Edwards or Victor Wembanyama? First, we are going to rock with you, Penn. So take us away.
All right. First, we got to talk about what is the face of the league? It's the guy that the league is putting the most money behind. It's the marquee guy. Well, I checked the jersey sales for last year, and Victor Wembanyama is already top 5 in jersey sales. He's number 4. He's right behind Curry, Braun, and Tatum. And that's as a rookie on a really trash team with Jeremy Sohan as a point guard. It's a damn near unwatchable basketball. I don't see Anthony Edwards top 10 in any of the last 4 years. So I think that matters. The league has already poured tens of millions of dollars into Wemby. They were airing his games with Metro 92. They didn't do that for any other player. The NBA app is basically the Wemby app. And this year, they're putting their money where their mouth is. And by the way, the last time the league did something like this, it was when they were airing LeBron's high school games with St. Vincent St. Mary. Next year, the Spurs are going to get 21 games on national television. By the way, their roster is still pretty trash. Doesn't matter. Wemby's going to be at Madison Square Garden on Christmas Day. It's not because his roster is good. It's because the league is putting money behind him in a way they haven't really invested behind a player in a long time. And there's a big reason for that is because the league is going global. And who better to be a global ambassador than a guy who is French born and his father is African? The league is clearly trying to expand into Europe and Africa, and there's no better ambassador for that than Victor Wembanyama. Finally, a caveat. This is a risk management equation, and the surest bet is the guy who keeps his head straight. And Wemby is very well spoken and very articulate and mature beyond his years.
All right, Haize, let's see what you got to say about this.
When it comes down to the guy who can be the next face of the NBA, I think you also have to put in personality. And Anthony Edwards has a personality that people already gravitate towards. When you look at how players around the NBA, and like Kevin Durant has already talked about Anthony Edwards being that next guy up and how he shines bright, according to the direct quote from Kevin Durant. And I tend to look at how their peers look at players. And Anthony Edwards not only has the personality both on and off the court, which we will at some point talk about his on the court resume for being the next face of the NBA, but also you talk about brand ambassadorship. Look at what Anthony Edwards has already done, being in a film, in a movie, in which a lot of people say he stole the show in that film. On top of that, you got to look at the performances that Anthony Edwards has already had, both in the playoffs and in big games. Yeah, not always performing in the way that a lot of people would like to see, but Anthony Edwards does not shy away from the spotlight. He doesn't shy away from the moment, and he's not quiet about how good he thinks he is, even when he named his top 5, making sure to say that he has himself ranked above that at a time where a lot of people would have tried to play the PC aspect of that. I think Anthony Edwards, when you look at just his growth, his confidence, and also in just the cockiness that comes out on the court as well with him, at the end of the day, Anthony Edwards is just somebody who is growing into being that face, that marketable face. Not to say Wemby isn't marketable as well, but it's just something different about a player that talks crap as well as backs it up and is not afraid and does not shy away from the moment, on top of already having many accolades to his name already.
All right, okay. I like this topic. Let's go, Penn. I like it.
Well, I love that you brought up his riz and his personality, but when's the last time you've seen LeBron James or Michael Jordan telling the entire arena to suck it? When's the last time you've seen a league led by a player who is not a league historian, who does not have a great appreciation for the players who came before him? Because Anthony Edwards made a lot of waves with the Wall Street Journal when he was asked about the 90s, and he basically said those guys didn't have skill. It was just Jordan who had skill back there. How did Magic Johnson feel about that? This league is a legacy. It's a fraternity that is 75 years in the making. You have to respect the past in order to be the future, and I think that matters. And of course, we got to talk about the players. Wembanyama is a better player right now. Right now. He's 20 years old. He's a better player right now. That's not to say Anthony Edwards is not a fantastic player, but the analytics are so clear on this. It is staring at you. You would be blind not to see it. Last year, Victor Wembanyama on a trash team with Jeremy Sohan playing point guard for half the season had, this is not a typo, 5.2 box plus minus. That's damn near superstar level, 3.8 value of a replacement. Those numbers are higher than any year of Anthony Edwards' career. By the way, you are correct. Anthony Edwards' career high were last year. Wemby's numbers beat that. After January 1st, when Wemby was a completely different player, he was 23 points, 11 rebounds, 4.4 assists, and 4 blocks. I'm not describing Hakeem Olajuwon in his prime. Those numbers might deceive you. I'm describing a 20-year-old rookie playing in the West on the trashiest roster in the league, Wemby is the truth.
Round 2, Haize.
And I think when you look at it and saying that these two guys are going to be, it's the next face of the NBA. And unfortunately for Wemby, he is on the trash team. And right now, Anthony Edwards is having those accolades in going on playoff runs and performing at the highest level. A two-time All-Star already. All NBA second team, all NBA rookie. Then on top of that, you look at the performances that he had in the playoffs that we've already gotten seen. Unfortunately, due to the circumstance, Wemby has not been able to be in the playoffs yet. Anthony Edwards has a gold medal. Anthony Edwards has been on playoff runs. Anthony Edwards has been on a team that damn near could have made the finals had they just made an improvement. We're talking about the next face of the NBA. And unfortunately, because of Wemby's situation right now with the team that he's on, there's not a clear path. There's an easier path with Anthony Edwards to be promoted more and pushed more in the postseason right now that we can say for sure than Victor Wembanyama is going to be. Nobody's doubting what Victor Wembanyama does. On the basketball court, you cannot take away anything from Victor Wembanyama. But at the same time, Anthony Edwards is a player that is doing it right now in the playoffs because of where his team is. And that does play a big part into that as well. At the end of the day, Anthony Edwards has had huge performances in the playoffs. 45 points in the game 6 that clinched the series win. On top of that, averaging 31 points, 8 rebounds, 6.3 assists, and 2 steals in a series in which they eliminated Kevin Garnett, in which Kevin Garnett said that Anthony Edwards was his favorite player to watch. Anthony Edwards right now is performing at a time and at a level that unfortunately Wemby just has not been able to get to because of circumstances, but you still got to take that into consideration.
All right. Pen, round 3. Let's do it.
Did you build a time machine where Anthony Edwards got to face off against Kevin Garnett? Where'd that come from?
Yeah.
Okay. Look, man, the numbers are clear on this one. The league gave Victor Wembanyama 21 nationally televised games this year, and he's on a trash roster. Last year, Anthony Edwards had 10. If he's the face of the league sure as hell does not agree with you and certainly agrees with me. And I'll tell you why. It's because of the numbers, and the numbers do matter. And it's not to take away from the player Wemby is, because he's a fantastic player and he's taking care of his body and he's the right guy to take that torch. And he's very well spoken and he's got a lot of charisma and he's got a nasty streak. And I understand that a lot of North Americans maybe, feel some way about a European coming over and taking the shine. But this is not your average European. France has a population of 68 million people. Just to put that into context, Joel Embiid's Cameroon, Nikola Jokic is Serbia, Giannis is Greece, combined do not have a population of 68 million. Add to that there are 21 million people across this planet who speak French. The league cares about new markets, and this is a new market that they can tap into. And that's not to say that non-French people don't fuck with Wemby. Of course they do. I don't speak French. I'm not French. I fuck with this dude. Been watching him for a long time. He is absolutely what you need in the face of the league. And if I'm betting billions of dollars on a guy to lead my organization, lead my league for the next 15 years, the surest bet in this league right now is Victor Wembanyama.
Fucking right, Pen. Haize, it's on you.
And while Wemby may be the best and safe bet, let's not act like we haven't seen the NBA push players before that end up not becoming the face like they hope they become the face. Everything that you just said and pointed out is great. And that's the NBA trying to market the one of the best players and a true generational player. But that doesn't always mean that they're going to become the next face of the NBA. The NBA also pivots. So yeah, the NBA is promoting Wemby as the unicorn that he is, as they should right now, because guess what? Wemby is such a special talent. Make no mistake about it. But it's still, you have to perform in that. And if Wemby continually, because of his team in the situation, does not make the playoffs, can that be somebody that they will continue to invest in to be the face of the league? Yeah, the market in France is great. As somebody who grew up in Europe, I understand that. But at the same time, you can take advantage of a market and gain money from a market and them still not end up being the face of the NBA. You still, to be the face, you not only have to perform individually, but you have to be able to get to the heights, because the last thing the NBA wants, and eventually it will pivot if the Spurs don't get there, is to keep making somebody the face of their league that ultimately can't go on deep playoff runs. At some point, the NBA will pivot. And, maybe we never have that conversation. We don't worry about it. Wemby is a great generational talent. Make no mistake about it. But at the same time, if a team like the Spurs and they get cute again with the aging Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes around him, don't make the playoffs, whilst Anthony Edwards keeps going on these deep playoff runs with his team, and God forbid they do make the finals, at some point the talent and the it factor of Anthony Edwards, to me, will be something that the NBA has to market and promote if he keeps having the success.
Wow. That was a good round one. Penn, we started with you. So, Haize, you will start off this round. Luca versus SGA. Who is the better player right now? Let's hear it.
All right. So in looking at this, like we both know what these players are offensively, but when looking at the totality of what makes a better player, we do have to talk about two sides of the ball. We'll get to efficiency in a minute too, as well, where that's where SGA beats out Luka a lot in the efficiency standpoint. But let's talk about the defensive side of the ball. SGA was first in the NBA in steals, first among guards as far as blocks in the NBA, around the top 5 in deflections, shots contested, second amongst guards, an opponent field goal percentage, second in the NBA. The fact of the matter is that when you look at the totality of the game of basketball, SGA affects more areas of the game, specifically on that defensive side of the ball as well. SGA was second in the NBA in defensive estimated plus minus at plus 3.5 this season, which is an amazing number when you look at it. It's plus as well as his defensive box plus minus being at a level that puts him near the top of the league. The fact of the matter is SGA, yeah, he's not as good of a scorer as Luka Doncic, but when you look at what he's able to do and the versatility grade that he has in guarding players in the NBA, SGA brings it more consistently on that defensive side of the ball. And while defense is something that not a lot of people focus on in the NBA, that is something that it does impact the full game of basketball. When it comes down to it, if you had to bet a player to make a stop, whether it's Luka Doncic or SGA, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is going to be better at guarding the player in front of him than what you give Luka Doncic at, on top of SGA giving that as much effort offensively as he does defensively.
Let's go, Penn.
Luka's better. He's much better. They were drafted in the same year. Luka has 5 All-NBA. Shai has 2. Luka's already made the finals. Shai hasn't sniffed the finals. 5 times Luka has finished. In 6 years, he's finished 5 times top 10 in MVP voting. How many players in league history can you say that about? That in their first 6 years, they had 5 top 10 MVP finishes. Shai's only done it twice. Career box plus minus. I'm glad you brought up analytics. Career box plus minus 7.8 versus 4.3. Luka wins. Let me start this out. Shai's good, but he's not Luka. Career value of a replacement 34.3 versus 20.2. Shai's good, but he's not Luka. 28.7 points per game, 8.7 rebounds, 8.3 assists per game versus 22.8, 4.7, 4.9. It's good, but it's not Luka. 400 games played. Neither one of these guys have been super durable, but 400 games played for Luka, 386 for Shai. Head to head, Luka is averaging 30, 10.3, and 9. He's averaging damn near a triple-double against Shai. Shai doesn't look like a superstar against Luka. In 10 games, he's averaging 25 and 4. Okay, Luka's more popular. If I'm building a team around a guy, I want him to be box office. If you want to know who's box office, ask yourself this. When the Dallas Mavericks come to town, is that a more expensive ticket or a less expensive ticket than when the OKC Thunder come to town? It matters.
Hey, it's back on you for round 2.
Now, I love how you are arguing the topic of Luka more so for his career than right now. We're talking right now. And there's no doubt that Luka has scored more points. He's had more accolades because at the end of the day, when you look at how Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's career started off in a much different place than Luka Doncic. And he wasn't on a team that was initially building around him. But if you look at the last 2 years from both these players, while they both have averaged over 30 points per game, efficiency matters as well. And while, yes, Luka, talk about the estimated box plus minus and all that. When it comes down to it as well, it's not just about the numbers that you put up, it's how you put them up. And Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, when you look at it, but despite the players still getting to the free throw line about the same amount of time, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a much better free throw shooter than Luka Doncic, despite getting to the free throw line a lot less than he does. And he actually whines a lot less than Luka Doncic does as well. When you look at Luka, even with all that whining and trying to get to the free throw line, 74 and 78% from the free throw line in the last 2 years, whereas Shai Gilgeous-Alexander over that same time with getting to the free throw line about the same amount of time without the whining, 90 and 87.4%. Let's also talk about the efficiency again. True shooting percentage last season, matter of fact, the last 2 seasons, of 63 for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to 61 for Luka Doncic. On top of that, let's look at the creation aspect of it. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is almost in the 90th percentile in open shots generated for his teammates. And while, yeah, Luka does that pretty well also, Shai Gilgeous has been on the team with Josh Giddey, non-shooters, and still has created open shots for his teammates. SGA is the better player.
Go ahead, Penn.
If I'm building around you, I got to know who you are in the playoffs. And I know that Luca in the playoffs is a killer. Now, I know you want to hone in on who they are today, but you can't use two players who were drafted exactly the same year, roughly the same age. Luca's a little bit younger too. You can't exactly use that and say, well, I'm going to cherry pick the last year of Shai and I'm going to throw out the previous 4 or 5 years. It matters to me. It matters that I have a 6-year body of work. And over that body of work, that's 50 playoff games that I have evidence that Luka shows up, right? He shows up big time. 8.7 box plus minus is damn near Michael Jordan, peak Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson levels. Shai Gilgeous is, 5.5 is nothing to sneeze at, but it's all right. Per 100 possessions in the playoffs, Luka is a killer. 40.8 points per game, 10.5 assists, 12.2 rebounds. Okay, Shai in the playoffs, it's almost half. 28.7 per 100, 6.5, 7.2, right? Now, I love that you're talking about efficiency, but usage matters too, man. And Shai is not the high usage player that you're making him out to be. Luka has a career usage in the playoffs of 37% usage. That is like generational. That's like higher than LeBron, okay? Shai's at 24.5, which I think 24.6, which is like very much below what you would expect from a superstar. So I'm taking Luka to be the floor raiser for my team.
Round 3. Let's do it, Haize.
And I get it, your perspective on using the full body of work, but the topic of the question right now is who's the better player right now? And there's no doubt about it. We can argue all semantics all day long. Yes, Luka has been better for longer. But at the end of the day, it's about the trends now. And Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is trending in the right direction where he's pretty much matching Luka Doncic. Yeah, the playoffs, that's a thing, and I'll give you that. But when you talk about, to use your own phrase of if you're taking a player right now to build around, would you not build around the player that gives more effort defensively, more consistently? And while, yeah, we can say that he gambles and things like that as Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, but the fact is the effort is there consistently, 82 games a year, whereas Luka Doncic defensively, let's be clear here, at times he's a defensive turnstile. Now, as well as we're talking about the usage rate, yeah, Luka Doncic has a very high usage, and that goes to him being on a team that has needed him to do a whole hell of a lot. But at the end of the day, we're talking about building a team, and who's the better player right now? And in building a team and looking at what Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was in the playoffs, what he's become, how he stepped up in the right moments at the biggest times as well for his team. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a player that you can have more versatility in the way that you build around. We just saw Luka Doncic a couple of years ago have Kyrie Irving, and it took a bunch of role players to get him to the point. The fact of the matter is that if you're building a team right now, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander offers you a more versatility in how you can build that team because of the efforts that he gives on both sides of the ball. And I think that has to matter in a case like that. Yeah, Luka offensively is spectacular, but when it comes to both sides of the game of basketball, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander does more.
I love that you keep bringing up defense. Like Luka's a terrible defender. Luka is not a terrible defender. He was a terrible defender. He's been a terrible defender, but he's still a 6'7" guy, and he is still one of the more positionally versatile defenders in the league. He guards twos, he guards threes, he guards fours, and his compete level has been a lot better. I know a lot of people have selective amnesia. They're going to be recency bias. Yes, he was a little bit hobbled in the playoffs, and his defense was much worse. But this year, he was a scoring champion while really holding up and being much better defensively. He's not a great defender. Shai is not a great defender either, okay? Don't let all those steals fool you. He's not a great defender. He's not a top 20 defender in the league. Yes, Shai is a better defender than Luka. That's not a surprise to anybody, but the gap between these two players offensively is where we're talking about because it's not equivalent. You say two sides of the ball. We hopefully agree that offense is much more important than defense when building a team around a player. Okay. And Luka puts more pressure on the defense. He gets harder matchups. He gets more doubles. He gets more blitzes. He has less help around him, in my opinion. You know, he has the higher volume. He's a higher volume 3-point shooter. He can score from anywhere. He does that Kobe thing where, you know, anywhere inside of 35 feet, he's a threat to score. That aggression offensively, that generational passing. Like, I can't even compare these two players as passers because honestly, Luka is on a completely different level as a passer. He's on a completely different level as a rebounder. And honestly, it's like you can't really talk about defense without talking about defensive rebounding. And Luka is much better on that end as well. So, you know, we can go on all day, but he's much better.
All right. Throw up that timer. We're going to throw up these polls, and we need you guys to go ahead and settle this good old-fashioned debate. Luka versus SGA. Haize, you went first last round. So, Pin, we are back on you to kick things off. Your time will start whenever you start. Better decade of basketball.
I grew up as a kid in the 90s, and I got to tell you, this is an ode to my childhood self, watching Michael Jordan, watching Magic Johnson, watching and trying to mimic Allen Iverson. The stars were iconic in the 90s, and they stayed put. Jordan, Hakeem, Shaq, Iverson, Magic, Kobe, Barkley. We got to see the start of Vinsanity. We got T-Mac. We got Kevin Garnett. We got Tim Duncan. We got Rasheed Wallace. We got Penny Hardaway, Grant Hill, Scottie Pippen, Sean Kemp, Chris Webber, Jason Kidd, Gary Payton. My God. How many top 10 players all time? I don't care what your top 10 list is. I guarantee you have at least 5 guys from the 90s on your list. Magic, Jordan, Kobe, Shaq, Hakeem, Duncan. Those guys all played in the 90s, right? The Stars actually stayed with one team. Jordan stayed with the Bulls. Thomas with the Pistons. Ewing with the Knicks. David Robinson with the Spurs, the Twin Towers. You could invest in something and know that it was going to stay put. That consistency to me matters. Hakeem with the Rockets, he stayed his entire prime, right? Contrast this with the 2010s, where you had the best player in the league starting your decade out in the 2010s with Cleveland. Then he goes to Miami, not 1, not 2, not 3, never mind. It was 2. Okay. Then, had enough, go back to Cleveland, win a ring there. Then, okay, see you, Cleveland. Don't burn my jerseys this time. And then off to LA. And he's not the only one who did it, right? You got Kevin Durant. You got him joining up against, with the 73. Where's the compete level? I miss the decade where guys actually wanted to fight each other.
All right, Haize, you got it.
Well, I fully agree with you about the nostalgia aspect. Much like you, I grew up in the 90s and I was a Bulls fan in the 90s. And so, yeah, it's a great nostalgia factor. But I think the point of this is the better decade of basketball for the game of basketball. At least that's the point that I'm looking at. And when you look at it, 4 different teams won the NBA title from 1990 to 1999. That's the Pistons, Bulls, Rockets, and Spurs. 7 different teams won NBA titles from 2010 to 2019. The Lakers, the Mavs, the Heat, the Spurs, the Warriors, the Cavs, and the Raptors. And then when you also pair into that the varying styles and how the game evolved over that time, we're talking about a time where in the early 2000s to 2002 to 2005, there were major changes made to the game of basketball that affected the way the game of basketball was played. In the 2010s, it was the refinement of that era, and thus we got to see the run and gun era. We got to see the rise of the 7 seconds or less offense. We got to see the rise of LeBron in his prime. We got to see the Golden State Warriors. And I think when you look at the totality of the game of basketball and what era and decade affected and impacted the game of basketball more. Yeah, the 90s were great. Make no mistake about it. That nostalgia, we're not done with the 90s, despite what some people said. But at the end of the day, and talking about the game of basketball as a whole, there was more growth done in that era, especially when you look at the international play and the growth of international players, more versatilities and centers. You're still talking about the 90s where players were refined to very specific roles within their positions. In the 2000s and 10s, we saw the growth outside of that to where it wasn't just about what you do per what your position says that you does, but your overall game.
Back to you, Pin. Let's do it.
I got to talk about the game we're talking about. You talking about diversity. Well, diversity of outcomes. This team won, then that team won. The Raptors won. The Lakers. Okay, well, you know what? It matters to me the diversity of the game that I'm actually watching on the TV. In front of my eyes. It matters that every team is not playing the same bullshit brand of basketball. The Bulls did not play the same style of basketball as every other team in the league. The Orlando Magic had a distinct style that matters to me. Now, it also matters to me the physicality. The screens are harder set, right? It matters to me that teams, like the teams that I'm actually watching on the court, are actually like teams that don't like each other, that they're actually going and competing against each other. What about load management? What is that? What kind of message are we sending with load management and all this physically soft shit? And again, some of it comes down to injuries, but where are your Iron Men? Where's your AC Green playing over 1,000 games straight? That's not happening in the 2010s. In the 2010s, you had guys like Kawhi Leonard who got injured. You got Kobe Bryant injured. You had Paul George, huge injury. Derrick Rose, injuries. A lot of the biggest stars of the 2010s. I mean, we could have seen a Kobe renaissance in Los Angeles towards the end of his to his twilight, but we didn't even get to see that because of injuries. So I'm just saying, stars didn't play as much. They didn't stay with the same teams, and that to me really matters in terms of the product that I'm watching on the TV.
Back to
And
you,
then let's
Haize.
talk about the product that we're watching on the TV. Let's talk about the fact that the growth of the NBA game has seen some of the most substantial growth that it ever saw in the 2010s, partially in due to the number of stars that you had. Yeah, the 90s were more physical. Nobody's going to make that argument that they weren't. But at the end of the day, yeah, the protection of your players of then thus as well of your assets put you in a situation to where you're able to see your players have longer careers. You're able to see your players for longer over more sustained periods of time. On top of that, right, as we're talking about the enjoyment of the game of basketball, to say that there were teams, there have been no teams with distinct styles in the 2010s. Let's make no mistake about it. I think you're confusing the 2020s and where that's going with the 2010s. Let's just look at the teams that won the championships between 2010 and 2019. Did the Lakers play the same way as the Mavericks? Did the Mavericks play the same way as the Spurs? Did the Spurs play the same way as the Warriors? The answers to all those questions are no. So to say that these teams did not have distinct styles just because it wasn't the 90s where screens were set harder and the game was more physical is just downright incorrect. We've seen players grow into aspects where just Steph Curry's game would have not been accepted in the same way in which it was, taking half-court shots in the 90s. And the fact that we at sometimes drop down our guard on what we have these predefined roles of, and again, that comes down to the embracement of the international game as well, is that you got to see players do more, and you got to see some players that unfortunately probably would have fizzled out in the 90s have longer careers and make bigger impacts when it comes down to it as well in the thousands.
Round 3.
I like that you brought up the growth of the game, and I understand the numbers may say something else, but I'm going to tell you right now, as a North American fan of the NBA in the 90s, the game grew more internationally in the 90s than it did in the 2010s. I'll tell you why. Largely, the growth in the 90s was about the product. It was about the players. It was about the personalities. It was about the charisma. It was about wanting to see Michael Jordan, wanting to see Kobe Bryant, wanting to copy Allen Iverson. These are the things that really captivated the minds of kids all over the world. This is what made people fall in love with the game. The growth of the game right now is largely due to technology. We're seeing the NBA expand into new markets, into third world countries. Frankly, there are countries right now that have smartphones that did not have televisions 35 years ago, 30 years ago. So the truth is, the numbers can say one thing, but I think everyone knows what product was really more captivating, which one we're going to talk about more in 35, 40 years. The fact that Michael Jordan existed in the 90s, was at the peak of his powers in the 90s, that matters to me. The greatest player of all time, the guy that you crossing your hands, but he's on your shirt for a reason. That was 35 years ago, right? So it matters to me that. And it really matters to me that, you have this legend, this franchise icon, right? And in his game 6, you had 36 million people watch Jordan versus the Jazz. And it wasn't because Malone and Stockton were so interesting, it's because he was so big. LeBron James came back from 3-1 and didn't grab those ratings in a game 7.
Haize, round 3.
And what you're talking about, the growth of the game, I know you say technology, but to say that people didn't grasp the game, how many kids now are imitating Steph Curry? We got to see prime LeBron James. And while, yes, Michael Jordan is my GOAT, make no mistake about it, prime LeBron James in the 2010s and what he was able to do, the finals runs that he was able to go on, even the finals in which he lost in those performances, let's not act like that didn't grow the game. On top of that, the Redeem team happened in that time as well. The growth of international, even I would say the U.S. losing in an international stage and bringing more awareness to the international game. We're talking about the decade of basketball, not the decade of the NBA. And when you're talking about the overall game of basketball, to say that these guys and Steph Curry, James Harden, LeBron James, Dwayne Wade didn't grow the game of basketball, what are we talking about, Penn? When you look at the end of the day, and I know I use that phrase a lot, I've just noticed that myself as well, but when you look at all this at the end of the day of the game of basketball, you can talk about technology or what. I'm sorry, they took advantage of what was there, but if you didn't have the skill to captivate that audience with the technology, it wouldn't have gotten anywhere to the level which it did. The impact of LeBron James, the growth of Steph Curry, to see these dynasties rise and fall over this decade was amazing for the growth of basketball, as well as inspiring kids today. When we look at how modern basketball is, regardless of how you feel about it or not, how modern basketball is played, right now, it comes from more of the players that happened in the 2010s than the 90s. It just is what it is. The growth of the game internationally, both domestically and everything else included, it is what it is.
It is what it is. The polls have ended. The judges have sent their votes in. Round 1. This was the topic of Who's the next face of the NBA? Penn, you won round 1, 2-1. Round 2, who's the better player right now? Luca or SGA? Haize, you won that round with a sweep, 3-0. Round 3, we just heard it. Better decade of basketball, the 2010s or the 90s?
Congrats,
With a
man.
3-0 convincing lead. Haize, my man, you will be advancing.
Hey, great battle, Pen. Hey, that was great, bro. I had a lot of fun. This is probably my most fun debate, bro. Like, great points through and through throughout all that, man. I had a lot of fun.
Awesome, man. Congrats to you. Good luck on your next round.
Thank you, Pen.
It's the player choice way. Yeah, them boys gon' get it started. The player choice way. Yeah, the player choice way. Come and switch lanes into the player choice way.